So I felt completely empty as I sat on the couch at my therapist's office, as me and my wife tried one more time to just make this thing work, to make the marriage work. And empty. That's all I could feel. Looking at this woman, staring at me, loves me wholeheartedly, and all I could think to myself is, why? Why can I not go all in? That feeling, that moment was the feeling of being filled with complete shame. And it was the shame not only of having to tell my wife that I had an affair, but to tell her that I fell in love with another woman. And in that moment, to see somebody that you love just drop to the ground, to almost feel like everything that they held as a truth just left them, to know that I hurt them that much, and to just feel completely empty. To feel this sense of shame that isn't like, oh, you did a bad thing, but this sense of shame that says, you are a bad person, that I was a bad person, and that I didn't deserve to love or to be loved. So I sat there and I just felt empty. I felt nothing. How could I feel nothing in this moment? Rewind, 5-year-old Chris, that running around somewhere that fall, not a big fall, but there was that fall. There was that fall where I banged my knee and I'm crying. And in that moment, here comes my dad as I'm crying. And it's like, Chris, don't worry about it. Be a big boy, tough it out. My mom's in the background being like, she's like, Kathy, don't worry, he's gonna be fine. Now, my dad had no malice in his heart, but there was a moment right then that I heard the person that I love, my dad, tell me to be a big boy, to not cry. So fast forward a week, a month later, and that next fall, because they all happen when you're a little active boy, all of a sudden I banged my knee again, and I squeezed. And I squeezed so hard that somehow from my knee to my tear ducts, the tears didn't flow. And all of a sudden I knew that if I squeezed hard enough, if I was strong enough on the inside, that all of a sudden I could keep from showing emotion. I could be a big boy. I could have this little journey to being a man. So that was the moment in which I began to know that I had the power to hide my emotions, ultimately maybe allowing me to be accepted as a man. So that little stoic boy turned into a stoic young man. And I entered the corporate world with that same belief that I needed to hide my emotions or else I couldn't succeed. And I'll let you know on a little secret. I always had an issue with belonging. I never felt that I belonged. So when you enter that corporate world, guess what? If you're a success, if you're a winner, it don't really matter what you look like. Doesn't matter what you sound like. You are a part of the winner crew, and no one can take that away from you. So here I am entering the corporate world, and I know that if I let emotions out, if I'm an emotional person, that'll be a sign of weakness. Then, you don't get the big accounts. They can't trust you to close the big deals. You ultimately won't be on this beautiful little trajectory towards success, the success that as a man that we all need to achieve to belong to the winners club, to belong to the success club. And so that's how I live my life. And all of a sudden I sat down in a meeting. I sat in a meeting with my boss, and he told me, we're cutting your territory in half. And then that moment you think half the accounts, half my forecast, half the deals are going to get closed. And all of a sudden that little trophy that you get when you make Top Performers Club, basically the little thing that says, I belong to the winners club for that company, just felt like it was just fleeting. It was just kind of going away. But of course you sit in that meeting, doesn't bother you, doesn't bother me at all. And then I left that meeting. Something felt off. So I decided to go get in my car. I knew that there was some sadness going on. And I get in the car and I start driving. And all of a sudden this tick, 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 boom. I swear I'm having a heart attack. Tears are running down my face. I am screaming by myself uncontrollably in my car, and I'm shaking. I'm shaking even thinking about it right now. I'm like, UCSF hospital. I just whip my car into the emergency room drive-in. I come out, I literally think I'm having a heart attack. My wife comes, I'm sitting there, the doctor comes in the room, and the doctor tells me, he's like, you're fine. You just had a panic attack. And I'm like, fine, like I am not at risk of having another one of these tomorrow, or fine, like I'm not dead. And it's like, you're fine. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, all right. At this point, me, my wife, my mom, and my therapist, only ones that know this has happened. So I go to bed, I get an average night's sleep, and I wake up and I go right back to work the next day like nothing happened. So I'm literally killing myself by keeping my emotions inside to fulfill what I think is this path to success, this path to what I'm supposed to be. And it's literally freaking killing me. And that disconnection from my emotions that's happening in the corporate world goes directly into my relationship with my wife. I'm trying to avoid the emotions. I don't want to hurt her. I don't want to do the thing that's going to add the stress, that's going to bring the emotions out. And man, I was simple back then. I still have a slight bit of shame even thinking about this, let alone voicing it. But man, I used to just want my wife to go to the gym. I used to want her to work out not because solely it makes you look fit, but it also meant we could do all the fun things in life that are about being fit. But I couldn't bring that up because I didn't want to shame her. I didn't want it to create an issue. Her job was killing her. It was so much stress that it brought to her, ultimately bringing it to me, but I couldn't have a conversation about that because ultimately that would maybe negatively impact her, that would ruin the night, ruin the weekend, whatever it might be, so we never talked about it. I felt like I was playing second fiddle to her whole family, and all I wanted to do was like, can I just be like number two, like you, then me, maybe for just a little bit? But I didn't want to like disrupt the pattern. Because ultimately, there was never the right time to have an emotional conversation. There was, we just got done with work. Not now, don't want to ruin the night. Oh, it's the morning. It's going to be a stressful day. Don't want to ruin your day by starting it off with something stressful. Oh, it's Friday. Don't want to ruin the weekend. So let's just never have them. And if we keep avoiding these conversations, everything will be smooth. One night, phone rings, 3 o'clock in the morning, it's her mom. And all of a sudden, I feel it. I feel it coming. And all of a sudden, hysterical conversation between the two of them. And all of a sudden, there it is. Tick, tick. But right before the boom, it's like in the movies when you see the good guy throw the bad guy on top of the grenade, except now the grenade is like inside my like human vest. And so it's that tick, tick. And then all of a sudden it goes, and it's like I smothered this panic attack with my heart. So it literally felt like it just blew up on the inside and never came out. I was literally killing myself because I couldn't express emotions. I couldn't let it out because I was scared, or I was just so disconnected from them. I didn't even know how to let them out. So in that moment, I began to think, okay, standard Chris Walker. I'm an engineer, logic analyzer. Inputs, desired output, let's just change the knobs. And as I'm doing that, to go into another cycle of the standard, the norm, I'm like, I don't even know who I am. So I don't know who I am. How can I really make a decision on what I want to be, who I want to be? So, like all logical human beings at that point, I told myself, I'm going to move to Bali to become a yoga teacher. And yep, packed my bags, I was leaving the UK, got my yoga mat, and I got 6 books with me. Now you might be asking yourself, why is that important, Chris? Well, I was not a reader. Literally to that point in my life, at the age of 32 maybe, I'd probably read 12 books max cover to cover. And that's including the summer reading books that you literally mandate that you read in high school. So I'm like, I'm going to change. I'm going to prove to myself that I'm going to change by reading books. So I get to Bali and I get into this routine of yoga, eat, sleep, repeat. It's a pretty solid one. And with this focus on what was actually filling me up in the moment, all of a sudden I just felt lighter. I looked back and I just was like almost shocked. There was just so much bullshit that I thought was so real, and it was just weighing me down. So yoga, eat, sleep, repeat, little cacao on the side, little dance on the side over here, maybe a lot of dance on the side. And I just ultimately began to feel, and it was beautiful. I began to feel light. And I only describe as like I was in like a really dark tunnel on a train. And you knew that you were just looking for a little light at the end of the tunnel, but you had no idea when it was coming. And so I just remember like that first feeling of like, I see like a star in the distance of a little bit of light. And I'm like, oh man, I think that's the inner peace light, just a little bit. And I don't use these words lightly, but it was the first time in my life that I began to feel a sense of self-love. Not like the full onslaught of self-love, but just like a little self-love sprinkle of salt on top of a dish. And I was just like, oh man. And through that, there was this feeling of maybe worthiness, or I'm enough just as I am. Oh man. And then I get the call. I get the call from my wife. We're separated at the time, and she's been deported. She's in a holding cell at Gatwick Airport, about to be deported back to France. And in that moment, I knew with this feeling of love that I had just began to really, really find for myself, that there's only one person that deserves this love. And it's the person that decided to unconditionally dedicate their life and love to me. So I'll buy a plane ticket, one way, Bali to Paris, and I am on my way. My bag is packed, and I got a book with me. Might call it the book. The book is Brené Brown's Daring Greatly. And let me tell you a little story about this book, literally this physical book. My mom gave me this book maybe like 8 years before. And she said, I just read this book. She might have got off like Oprah's book club or something. She's like, I think it'd be a good book for you. I'm like, okay, Mom, throw it around. That book traveled to 4 different apartments in San Francisco. That book traveled to San Francisco and then to Bali. I had never cracked that book. Literally, I had not even read the first page. I don't even know what this book is about. I don't know what Daring Greatly. I never heard the words. Didn't know nothing about no Theodore Roosevelt. But I do remember a number of times when I felt disconnected in life. I remember my mom would be like, you should really read that book that I gave you, that Daring Greatly book. And then other times when I'd be disconnected, and that only now what I call moments of depression in my life, my ex-wife would be, you know what? You should really read that book your mom gave you. Meh. So here I am. I got my book in hand, and I set out a gauntlet for myself. I set out a gauntlet that says, I'm going to read this book on this flight. Why? Well, 2 reasons. I am not a reader, and I'm going to not only prove to myself, but I'm going to prove to my ex-wife that I have changed. Because if anything says Chris Walker has changed, it says reading one book on one flight. So I'm on that plane ride, and I got 200 pages, and I got a pink Sharpie, a pink highlighter, and 200 divided by 10 means that 20 pages. So 20 page, I put a little check mark. Next 20, boom, boom. I am fading in and out of consciousness. Like, I gotta read this 20 pages so I get this check mark. And then all of a sudden, the 10th one goes, 200 pages, book complete. I'm sitting on an airplane, and I have tears pouring down my face. And I'm like, you mean vulnerability isn't weakness? I'm not alone? This isn't just me? Oh man, all those feelings, thinking that I was the only one. And so now, showing up in Paris, having had the simplicity of this impactful moment by just reading a book that I carried around the world for the last 8 years, and I knew that I now had no other choice than to repropose to my wife. So I'm in Paris, I'm at her Airbnb, and I am standing butt naked, and I am reciting a new set of vows that I have now decided to recite to my wife. And at the end of that, with tears streaming down my face, I ask her to marry me. She looks at me, tears down her face, and she says, I can't. And I just don't know how to even comprehend it. Leading up to this point, I cannot even express in words how full. I was just like, this is gonna go great. Oh, I feel great. I'm so optimistic. Like there was no way that what I had going on in my life could go any other way than for this to be the success, the perfect end to this beautiful little fairy tale movie that I have in my head. It felt perfect. It felt amazing. It felt so beautiful. I felt those things. I was feeling fully for maybe the first time in my entire life, maybe since 5-year-old Chris banged his knee so many years ago. And it was in those moments of feeling that reaffirmed what I already knew before I decided to even propose to my wife, was that was the change. The change that I made was beginning to accept feeling, to open up to this idea of vulnerability. But man, 31, 32 years old, how could I have lived so much of my life thinking vulnerability was weakness, running away from my emotions, hiding them, thinking that the world will judge them? I was 7, my first year of organized basketball. And I remember there was a kid on the other team, David Baird, couldn't dribble with his left hand. I saw that. He was vulnerable, so I terrorized him. I just guarded him. He couldn't go anywhere. I steal the ball from him. I steal and I steal and I steal. And it was like, I didn't even need to score, but every steal was like a little ding, a little point for Chris Walker. So there I was. And yeah, I was a little bit of a little asshole 7-year-old. We'll leave that for a later story. And what this taught me was 2 things. From that point moving forward, I believe that everybody else had the mindset that I had as 7-year-old Chris, where if I see a vulnerability, I'm going to take advantage of it. And then B, I now must live life to strategize on how to win. So instead of just living life, I created a strategy. Because why would you want to be a loser when you could be a winner? Because ultimately, all I really wanted to do was belong. So I took that and I began to live life looking to win. And man, when we look at only focusing on doing things to get the result, we miss the present moment. Something as simple as when we know where we're driving and all we do is focus on the end destination, we literally can miss the entire drive. So I was missing life, focusing on trying to set myself up to win. And so I stand here looking back at it, and I'm deciding to change. I decided to move from this view of looking at life as it is a game that is all about winning. And I decided to drop that. And I decided to choose to look at life as something that I want to experience. Something that I want to experience for each moment that is happening here in front of me. Because when you're result driven, you're going to miss this moment. And you're going to set yourself up for suffering. You're going to set yourself up for sadness and disappointment. To think about if you only got in the relationship to get to happily ever after and it ends, you feel like, oh, the relationship was a waste. If you create the company to hope that it gets bought or IPOs and you make big bucks, then it goes bankrupt, you feel that it was a waste. Say you do the whole career to be successful and belong, and you do all that and you still feel a lack of belonging, you feel like it's a waste. And it can just take you on dark and sad paths. So we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity right now to just drop all of those stories. to drop the bullshit that is, this is how you're supposed to look, how you're supposed to feel, this is what you're supposed to do. And when we drop all of that, or we do our best to drop all of that, we can then connect. We can connect to the truest, most authentic version of ourselves, that little 5-year-old Chris who just wanted to cry after he banged his knee. And when we connect to the true, authentic version of ourselves, it allows us to show up in life, in our most fullest. And then that authentic version of ourselves that we now show up in life as, maybe we can share that version of ourselves. We can share that maybe with someone that we love. And then we can begin to maybe move through life showing and expressing and being ourselves. Because if we don't, life's just going to pass us by, moment by moment. So we have a choice. We can let life keep passing us by until we die, or we can choose. We could choose that we've had enough.